Our next presentation is going to be from Dr. Rick Barrows. He's going to describe some of the current challenges to finding krill replacements. Rick has been putting together some of the formulations with our contestants here with the different ingredients and testing it on Atlantic salmon. Many of you know Dr. Barrows. He's a renowned fish nutritionist, founder of Aquatic Feed Technologies, which is a consulting company focused on development of sustainable aquaculture feeds. And he's been serving as our Chief Scientific Officer for F3 Innovation Network. Prior to that, he served many years as the lead scientist and nutritionist for the Trout Grains project of the Ag Research Service of USDA. All of our research projects that we've had with F3 have been designed, all his feeding trials, research projects, using his feed formulations. And so far, they've worked with shrimp, pompano, largemouth bass, and several other species. So he's going to talk about the design of the krill replacement challenge, a little more detail. So Rick, please.
Thanks, Kevin. And I put up the citation of this paper that was recently published that developed the methodology for the krill challenge, but then I didn't realize you guys were all going to have it in your bag, so you don't need to pay any attention to that. But it's a nice title for a research paper, an influence of krill, yeah. But the real objective of this study was to develop the methodology to determine the effect of an ingredient / palatant on feed intake and growth of Atlantic salmon. And that really feeds the greater objective of F3, which is to identify ingredients and nutrients needed for aquaculture diets that do not depend on marine sourcing. Because for decades, krill's been known as a palatant, but this study raises some other questions. We contracted with VitaPro Chile for this study. They had 28 half meter tanks and diet formulations. There were 7 different diets, a fish meal control, and then 6 diets in a 2x3 factorial with 2 base diets, either a plant-based or a animal-based, which was poultry byproduct meal. I'll go over that in just a second, with 3 different levels of krill supplementation. And to give you a little background of it all, the F3 group had been talking about a palatant challenge for 4 or 5 years, right after the first challenge. But I kept saying, we don't have the methods. I'm not sure if we can determine if this ingredient is affecting feed intake or growth, because the literature has shown that there's a lot of variability. Sometimes you see an effect and sometimes you don't see an effect. So that's the reason we ran this study. As far as feeding and sampling, fish were fed ad libitum with automatic feeders to excess every day, and twice a day the feed pellets were removed from each tank and counted so that feed intake could be substantiated. And then as far as the formulation goes, well, I really can't see either screen. The fish meal diet, the control diet on the left side of the screen, had 25% fish meal. And the plant protein series, which is P1, P2, and P3, had no fish meal. It's the same with animal protein. And then poultry meal was not in the control diet or the plant diets, but was in the animal protein diets at 26%. Then the primary ingredient for the plant series was soy protein concentrate at 27%. And then krill was supplemented those diets, none in the control fish meal diet, but P1 had 0, P2 had 2.5, P3 had 5% krill, and the same for the animal protein diets. Corn protein concentrate was buried in order to maintain the diets as isonitrogenous. The fish meal control diet had 19% fish oil, where all the experimental diets had only canola oil and algae oil, Veramaris. What was held constant in all the diets was blood meal, wheat gluten, Menon Pro 50 FF, taurine, vitamin mineral premixes. Minerals were chelated, and astaxanthin. And then all diets were balanced for phosphorus, lysine, methionine, threonine, and wheat flour varied from 10 to 18%. So the fish were sampled at day 45 and day 90. We looked at percent weight gain, survival, specific growth rate, thermal growth coefficient, condition factor, looked at hepatosomatic index, enterosomatic index, feed conversion ratio, economic feed conversion ratio, protein efficient ratio, and don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of them. The feeds were evaluated for approximate analysis, amino acid profile, and fatty acid profile. And at the end of the trial, we looked at peroxide value and mercury levels. So the effect of diet on weight gain was pretty clear. You can see on the left side of the screen that the fish fed the control diet, the fish meal diet, grew well, where, as expected, a plant-based diet, we've known from previous experience that Atlantic salmon don't do well with that type of base diet. Rainbow trout do great and have done so commercially for many years, but Atlantic salmon don't seem to. Adding 2.5% krill to it in the P2 diet, we got an increase in growth rate, not statistically different, but with 5%, it was statistically different than the base diet with no krill, and the same as the fish meal control. We were a little surprised to see the somewhat poor performance of the poultry byproduct meal series, because we fed those a lot before with very good results, but it could be an effect of the poultry source, meal source. There's a lot of variability in poultry meals. These diets were made in Chile. We didn't really get to select which was used. And there was no difference in growth rate of the fish fed the animal series, the poultry series. A numerical increase, but not a statistical increase. So from this slide, I think we can see that there is a beneficial effect of krill when you feed a plant-based series, but not when you feed a poultry-based series. So looking at feed intake expressed as kilograms per tank, we see that the feed intake was similar for P1 and P2 as compared to the fish meal control, but P3, which had very good growth rate, ate significantly more than the fish meal control, and all three of the poultry diets ate quite a bit, but there was an increase in feed intake with A2 and A3. This suggests a palatin effect as well. But if we look at weight gain, or feed intake as a percentage of body weight gain, we see a different pattern where there's an actual significant decrease in feed intake as krill meals added to the diet, which is the reason we didn't call the challenge the palatin challenge, because this suggests there might be a missing nutrient in krill that fish and poultry is providing. And there was, looking at percent body weight gain for feed intake, there's absolutely no effect when adding krill to the fish meal-based diet. And looking at feed conversion, you see a similar pattern with P1 or the plant-based diet with no krill having poor feed conversion, and the others in between. So I think what this has shown is that the addition of krill meal to a plant-based diet resulted in good growth equivalent to fish fed a fish meal diet. And the results correspond with previous studies showing there is a beneficial effect, but that effect varies depending on the base diet, what you're adding it to. And the methodology has been developed for the challenge. And if we go back and look at weight gain, this slide, the diets that are being included in the study, which is underway right now, the challenge study, the fish meal control, P1, which we call krill negative, And then P3 is the formula that all the contestants' ingredients are included into. They're just included at 5% instead of the 5% krill. So those are the 3 diets. There are some changes in the diet formulation for the challenge as compared to this study, which is just due to sourcing. The soy protein concentrate down in Chile is a lower protein level than what we're buying up here. The fish meal's a different source, just those kind of things. Optimal Aqua Feed is here. Joe, will you stand up, please? And Adam? These are guys feeding the fish. We're now 4 weeks into the first trial. And so we haven't weighed the fish yet, but they all look good. They're very healthy. There's been no mortality. They're growing well. We blind labeled all the contestants' ingredients before we sent it to them, so no matter how much beer you buy them, they can't tell you who's doing well and who's not. There's only 2 people in the room that know what the blind labeling is, and it was a couple months ago, so I already forgot, so it's a very small group. But if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer. All right. Craig. It's at Optimal Aqua Feed in South Dakota. With Atlantic salmon, yes. Yes. Joe, source of astaxanthin, is that Carafel pink? What's the source of astaxanthin?
The source is from Astapet. It's a 10% astaxanthin synthetic.
Sure. Anything else? Yes. I'm sorry?
Cost.
We haven't calculated that. Well, actually, in the paper it is economic FCR.
So you said that krill meal is very good palatant for fish feed. What are the compounds in krill meal that make it such a good palatant?
There's a lot of, there's several papers out there saying it's the free amino acids. Some people feel that it's the lipid portion. Ooh. Sorry, trying to see you. There's some papers that say it's the free amino acids. Others say that it's the lipids. I don't really know. But it's pretty obvious that I believe that there's a nutrient in krill meal, poultry meal, and fish meal that they all have in common that are required or needed when you feed a plant-based diet.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.